April 12th meeting of the Board of Directors of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority. Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Yes. Chair Rennie.
Present.
Director Corrigan. Here. Director Tate. Director Tate. Here. Director Griffith. Here. Director Abikoga. Here. Director Miller.
Here.
Director Sinks.
Here.
Alternate Director Leroy Munoz.
Present.
Director Gibbons.
Here.
Director Cortese.
Here.
And Director Craig. I'll note that Director Bruins is absent this evening.
Okay, so I want to make a comment about sort of managing the meeting. Our last meeting was 3 hours long, and we had a lot of things on the agenda, so it was probably sort of justified, but I'd say 2/3 of the directors asked me to make the meeting a little more crisp. So my thought is to set targets based on what I think the agenda length should be. So looking at tonight's, it's fairly short, although we may have a robust discussion on the action item, item number 4. So I'm thinking we should be able to finish somewhere between an hour and a half. So that's my target, and if people can kind of keep their comments somewhat crisp. If there's any violent disagreement with that, you know, let me know now. And also Director Cortese has a standing meeting that he has to leave for at 8, so trying to get as much in by the time he leaves every week is good also. And I'm thinking we can get to the important discussion certainly before he leaves, so I'm not going to rearrange the agenda, but in the future, if he'd like certain things to be moved up, I'm certainly willing to do that.
Thank you.
So, with that being said, the first item is going to be public comment. I don't think I have any cards. Is there any member of the public which wishes to address us? I don't see any, so I'll close that public portion of the meeting and move on to the consent calendar. We have the minutes from the March 8th meeting on consent, an approval of a Pacific Energy Advisors for Technical Consulting Services agreement. We have approved a smartphone stipend for the Silicon Valley Clean Energy employees, and we have the treasurer's report.
I move the consent calendar. Would like the opportunity to make a comment before we vote. Second.
Okay, so go ahead and comment, Director Miller.
Just on the smartphone stipend, in an era of modern communications, I think that we should ask our CEO to look into the possibility of an app. Maybe we get a site license on an app that will let people host dual phone numbers on their phones, and that may help some of the individuals have a professional presence and a personal presence on the same device that would benefit us.
Do Androids do that?
Yes, they do.
And iPhones too?
Yes, they do.
Okay, I assume staff noted the request.
Noted.
Does anybody else have a comment? So I have none. Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? No. One abstention. So that's probably 10-0-1, I guess we call it. 10-0 with one person absent. Yeah. So moving on to item number 2 on our regular calendar, which is the Executive Committee report, which I'll do briefly because it's mostly covered in agenda item number 4. We met on March 28th and selected a chair and a vice chair, which is myself and Director Harney, which are your chair and vice chair for the board, also became the chair for the Executive Committee. We approved the cancellation of a regular scheduled Executive Committee meetings for November and December, and rescheduled a single meeting for December 5th at 11:30 in the Sunnyvale office of Silicon Valley Clean Energy. We discussed the items items included in alternative to Type 2 renewable energy, as in number 4 on our agenda, that are coming up. Staff developed a rough draft of let's see, so. And we also talked about the development of Silicon Valley Clean Energy Renewable Bill Credit Transfer Tariff for the governmental agencies in our territory. And staff developed a rough draft of the tariff, and it's in the process of being reviewed and modified, so it's not coming to us tonight. Once input has been received from various sources, including the county and PG&E, et cetera, the tariff wording will be finalized and brought to the board for approval. So that That is my report. Would anybody that was at the executive committee like to add anything to that? Nope. Okay. Any questions? Any comments from the public on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public testimony, close this item number, and move on to our item number 3 on our calendar, which is the CEO's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay? No. First, new hires. I'm going to make this quick, and we've got a couple of new people. John Supp, and he's in the audience right there. He joined us as
Tom?
the account representative.
I think
I
you're
think you're off mic and for the purpose of
How
recording.
about now?
There you
That's
go.
better. There you
Thank
go.
you.
New hires. John Supp joined us as the new account representatives. If you would like to read about his background, it's in the packet. I'm doing this in the interest of saving time. Pamela Leonard was promoted to a position of community outreach manager, leaving now her position and a similar one open that we will try to fill as quickly as we possibly can. We also added a community outreach student. Her name is Isabel Miranda. And finally, Eric Acedo. He's going to be joining us as the administrative assistant, and he's going to be joining us on Monday. The other thing I wanted to report on that we have received California ISO registration. We are now able to buy or have rights to congestion revenue, and we expect that on an annual basis to bring us somewhere around maybe $5 to $6 million. And we discussed some of what we will do with the Risk Oversight Committee a few days ago, and they seemed satisfied with what we're trying to do. Last thing that I wanted, actually a couple more things that I wanted to report on. The Energy Risk Management Oversight Committee have met twice now, once on the 13th of March and back again on Monday. And they've looked at the risk management policy, which we're going to be sharing with the full board in the next meeting, the meeting of May. And we will be bringing it to the full committee, to the full board for approval in May. Also, we looked at the net open position for the remainder of 2017 and 2018 and 3 years after that. And we shared with the Risk Oversight Committee how we intend to go about filling some of these open positions. Another thing to report on is we finally now getting to a point we can bring in the sustainability managers from the different cities and have a round table and talk to them about some of the programs that we can offer the cities. We're going to have that discussion tomorrow, and hopefully this is going to be an ongoing roundtable committee that will share with us some of what the cities would like from us to do for them. And the final thing I wanted to report on is actually two things. One is the marketing work that we are doing, and it's all included in your report. So far, we are seeing the opt-outs to be roughly about 1% in terms of account numbers. In terms of actual consumption, it is down to 0.3%. The opt-ups are roughly about 1,800 so far. And the opt-outs is about 800, so the opt-ups is about maybe 2.5%. And
Is that of customers or load?
The opt-ups is accounts. So it could be, for example, if one of the cities have 10, 20 different accounts, then yeah, it's one customer, but it's 20 different accounts. So we have 1,800 accounts that opted up. And I think largely because all the cities, or most of the cities, did opt up, with the exception of 2. And finally, you have attached to your report to the report is the regulatory and legislative report that Hillary put together. And we do want to report on one thing that I'm going to ask Hillary to step up and report on it.
Hi, everybody. Hillary Staver, Legislative and Regulatory Affairs. So there has been some talk, we've gone over briefly in previous meetings about the fact that the legislative session is starting up, and I know there's been some interest in developing a comprehensive platform for SVCE that governs how we get involved in legislative advocacy and lobbying. So what we're planning is hopefully in early to mid-May, there's going to be a workshop where we can basically accomplish two things. We can have a discussion about what we want the underlying principles that guide SVCE's legislative positions to be. And then we'll go through the list of current bills that are relevant to CCA matters and develop official support, oppose, abstain positions on them. So currently, the only bill related to CCAs that has advanced as far as being actually heard in a committee is SB 618. That's something that, it's a bill that would drastically increase CPUC oversight over CCA integrated resource planning. That is actually just as of this afternoon, a couple hours ago, now scheduled to be heard on Tuesday in the Senate Energy Committee. So I will be attending that in addition to representatives from other regional CCAs. But then after that, as other bills start to come up in committee, we want to make sure that we have talked about where you guys stand and how comfortable you are having SVC out there taking positions and how you want us to decide what we support and what we don't. So there'll be a proposed agenda and some proposed dates coming soon, and you guys can help us schedule that. Thank you.
Do we have a position on the one that you talked about?
SB 618, that's something that is being broadly opposed by the entire CCA community. There are a number of issues with it. Basically, it would try and treat CCAs like investor-owned utilities. It would give the CPUC the right to officially approve our integrated resource plan rather than simply certifying it as they do now, which certification is essentially just acknowledging receipt of it. So this is something that would have profound implications for our autonomy as CCAs. And also, it's attempting to amend bill language that was put in place by SB 350, which is not, the original bill language has not been fully implemented yet. So essentially, it's trying to change a law that has not been implemented, and therefore we haven't seen the results of the original language yet. So there are a number of reasons why this bill is inappropriate from both a logistics standpoint and also from a CCA structure and autonomy standpoint.
I think part of the question is, have we taken a position? Did we send an opposed letter?
There has been an opposed letter put together by the Board of Supervisors in Santa Clara County. There was expressed interest in that, so I sent them some draft language.
That was executed and sent out today. I'm sorry if you didn't get a copy of it. I asked my staff to copy you in time for the meeting. Might not have happened.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
You guys very much for putting that together. And I have contacted some of you who are in the district of Senator Jerry Hill. He is the only member of the Senate Energy Committee whose jurisdiction falls within SVCE service territory. So thank you to all of you who have reached out to him, and he's expected to solidly oppose the bill.
Be advised, many of us know many of the senators, whether they represent us directly or not. So you're probably better off getting the entire board rather than just the subset that you think might apply.
All right, well, thank you.
Okay, Director Singh, you had a comment on this?
Yeah, I'm very interested in having you help us lay out a strategy. I think we need, there's strategy and tactics. We need to understand the big picture. What is it that we see ourselves doing, and not only in reactionary mode, but in a proactive mode with the legislature, with the CPUC, and I think, so far Sonoma, among others, has really taken a lead in driving the agenda here, and I think all the directors deserve an opportunity to, think about these questions with you and come to some general agreement so that, as these bills come up, we can react quickly. But I think we need to be more than in simply reactionary mode at this point. And we have enough political clout, frankly, that we ought to start flexing it, in my view.
Well, this is something that will help us also, this workshop will help us later down the
Yeah.
line in the legislative session, because as of now, the current iterations of the bills as they are now will likely change. And logistics-wise, we won't be able to sort of notify everyone every single time a bill changes. So we'll work to develop a strategy that will help us as staff decide if something is amended at the last minute or changes quickly.
Yeah.
Sort of how do we decide how we fall on that?
Right.
And that's what the principle.
Where does it fall in our framework of strategy and tactics? And I might also point out, I mean, as I've come to understand more about this market, Tom has educated me, some of you have educated me, a lot of environmentalists have educated me. We have a big problem coming up with the duck curve. Everybody loves to talk about how we're going to get all kinds of new jobs for solar, deploy. But I think if we're being responsible, we have to understand that we have a big crash coming. And the point at which we're going to have a lot of people upset, not only with PG&E and with the CPUC, but with us, is when, rates shift so that your solar customers no longer have the privilege of dumping a lot of electricity on the grid during the day, right? When that peak payout occurs from 5 to 9, is my understanding, this is the plan, somewhere in 2018, 2019, if we're tracking PG&E's rates, our customers are going to go, what the heck? I just put in the solar system. I was encouraged with all these credits, and now, I'm getting much less during the day than I was. So we ought to be, responsible. That ought to, in my view, part of our strategy ought not just be helping community choice energy, but we have to advocate for positions in the state of California that make sense and give us always-on electricity, right?
I think, I just want to add one thing, that in addition to putting the workshop together and putting together some legislative strategies and legislative platform that will help us push positions that would make sense, not just for our CCA, but for all the CCAs in general. We also put in a strategic plan together that addresses power supply, how we're going to acquire power supply in the future,
Right.
what goals we're going to be trying to achieve when we acquire the power supply, and with that will be strategies and tactics related to it. There will be also talk about the marketing, how we're going to market our resources and whatnot. That strategic plan, the draft of it, is coming to you for discussion in the next month, along with the risk management policy, which will come to you for approval.
Great.
And-
I really appreciate that.
And just to follow up on your comment, it's a good point. This is something that we will want to discuss. There are various stances we can take on different categories of bills. 618 is an easy one to start with because it pertains very directly to our operation as CCAs. But there are certainly other bills that may not talk about CCAs directly or sort of directly target them, but will have impacts on the energy landscape that we arguably could decide to take a position on. So that's one thing that we'll talk about, is going to be the scope of the types of bills that we want to get involved and take stances on.
Director Gibbons?
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, that worked. I think obviously a very important discussion for us, and tagging on to Commissioner Miller's, or Director Miller's comment. All of us, many of us, have a lot of personal relationships with legislative people from various jurisdictions over the years, so it is useful to keep us all in mind. But also, if you would like the board to take positions, there's also some of the other organizations we belong to, like the League of California Cities. They have a regular notice coming out on the status of all bills, and then periodically they'll send out an emergency alert and ask each city to take a particular stand. And then we also have the Cities Association that can take a stand. So we've got several layers of political connections and power and paying attention to us that you can consider when you start working on that strategy.
Well, thank you. And in the meantime, since that's been mentioned a couple times, I will go ahead and notify all of you for the time being when a bill comes up urgently.
Okay. CEO Habashi, do you have more to this report?
No, Mr. Chairman, that's it.
Okay, so I have one speaker card. Let me open public testimony. If Bruce Carney would like to come forward.
Hello, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you again. Actually, I have a couple of topics I'd like to jam into my 3 minutes here. The first is something that Hillary, I think, is aware of but didn't mention, which is that There's going to be another en banc hearing of the CPUC and CEC jointly on May 19th in Sacramento. And to sort of broad brush it, they are aware of the tectonic changes taking place in the electricity market landscape. And they're trying to get out ahead of all of the changes that have already happened and the ones they see coming, having to do with the creation of more CCAs, perhaps the opening of direct access, and perhaps even a return to direct consumer choice like we had 18 or 20 years ago. And so this is something that should definitely be on the radar screen of all CCA directors, not only here, but around the state. The other is that PG&E has recently released their figures for greenhouse gas-free and renewable energy for last year, and they're making tremendous progress. They have passed some of the existing CCAs. They're at 33% renewable and 70% carbon-free, which is a 10 percentage point increase from the prior year. And so the value proposition that CCAs, including this one, offer to the public are becoming challenged by PG&E's change of what they're delivering. And I hope those facts will be considered as you dig into the options that are presented in item 4 on tonight's agenda. My personal belief is that there is some blend between option 2 and option 4 that hasn't yet been given a name or a number and presented to you that would be better than option 2 and better than option 4. And I hope that you'll take the time either tonight or later in some other setting to deliberate and to see if there may not be a blend that's just the right point. One last topic, as you probably know, PCE has a Citizens Advisory Committee which they're recruiting for, hoping to fill 12 to 15 people to advise PCE's Board of Directors about community sensitivities to various things that come before their board. And up until now, I have not advocated that you create a similar committee because, frankly, there haven't been very many issues where community sensitivities were involved. But this item is definitely one of those. Issues around bundled versus unbundled RECs, additionality versus non-additionality, simply buying energy from existing renewable resources, are a big deal within the environmental community, as I'm sure most of you know. And so I would just like to say that if this decision becomes politicized and is really challenging, perhaps one way to make similar decisions in the future would be through the use of a community advisory committee. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any more cards. Staff would like to respond.
I just wanted to say thank you, Bruce, for mentioning the en banc. If any of you are interested in attending that, if you contact me or Andrea, we can send you the information, the RSVP link for that. That is expected to be a well-attended discussion.
This is May 19th,
Correct.
all day? Okay.
Okay, so I will close the public testimony portion of this. Do the directors have any more questions or comments on the CEO's report? Okay, seeing none, I will close this item and move on to the meat of tonight's agenda. If Mr. Habashi would tee us up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In terms of background, back in July of 2016, we started to talk about what type of resource mix we need to have, and there were plenty of numbers being floated around. Depends on who was holding the floor at the time. Some people wanted to do a lot of type 1 renewable resources. Some others wanted to do less. There were talk of doing maybe 50%, 60% mix of renewables and greenhouse gas free. Eventually, we landed on an approach that probably got us to be first among all the CCAs in California, and that's to go for 100% greenhouse gas free on day one. And the approach that we took is to go for 25% type 1 renewable, which is basically renewable resources that are in California or in a different state but have a transmission path to the California grid. And another 25% would be type 2, which would be resources, renewable resources that are located outside of California and have a transmission path to California, but that transmission path could be congested or curtailed and therefore they would bundle that resource with some other resource in California. And we opted for 50% large hydro, which is not considered by the state to be eligible, renewable for meeting the state's requirement for renewable resources. So that was the mix, 100% greenhouse gas free, and 50 and 25 and 25. Later on in November, we went out for bid, and we got results that seems to give us enough to satisfy all the type 1 resources that we needed, all the 50% of large hydro that we went out for. The type 2 seemed to be in short supply. In addition, the ones that did offer it offered it in small quantities that did not add up to the full amount that we needed. We took some of what was offered of type 2. We filled in all the large hydro, we filled in all the type 1 renewable, and we took as much as was offered of type 2 that seems to be priced appropriately, and we figured we'll wait until January, we'll go out again to fill that position, that open position that we have in type 2, which we did. We tried again. Actually, we tried about 3 times this year to fill that position, and it seems continuously to be coming in short supply, and the prices for that type of resource have gone up steadily since we've tried for the first time. We do have one supplier now that a couple of months ago said, I will fill that position for you, and we came to you and we said, okay, it looks like we have a supplier that will fill the position. The price is a little higher than what we expected, but that's fine. It's still within reason. They told us it will take 2 weeks to get the credit agreement all looked after. It took 2 months for them to actually look over our credit, and eventually they came back and said, we can only fill 2017, 2018, and by the way, the price has gone up. It's different than what we gave you already. Once we get the agreements all in place, we'll come back and talk about the price. I've just, less than an hour ago, actually an hour and a half ago before this meeting, I've asked for the reprice, and I still got more of an indicative price that was definitely higher than what they suggested, and they made it very clear that they will not be able to fill the full open position that we have. They don't mind filling it a little at a time, which means every time you try to fill a piece, you have to pay a little bit of higher price. So that's where we're at. So that gets us to the position that I would like to take, which is we need to find some alternative that we can use as a fallback position. We will still pursue, and I've said that as early as something around half an hour ago to one of our, the people that work with us at Pacific Energy Advisors. I said, go out again and scout, and this time we'll be willing to pay a little bit more than what we had in mind. But scout for as many as we can get, smaller quantities from different suppliers. Let's see if we can fill that position. But we do need to have a fallback position. We need to find a way that will say, okay, I can get up and walk off this table if I have to and go find something else to do that will fill the open position that we have right now. And that gets us to the 4 options that we have in front of you today. Option number 1 is basically to say that we're going to fill that open position with large hydro. We'll keep the greenhouse gas free at 100%, just like we promised. However, we've been advertising and marketing a 50-50, 50% renewable, 50% large hydro. It would be kind of tough to try to kind of change that really quickly in order to adjust the percentages. So although it's a pretty decent option and well priced, I would probably refrain from doing it because it will probably be a difficult one to explain from a marketing perspective. Second option is to just basically say we'll just go for all type 1 for that, whatever that is that we couldn't fill in the type 2, we'll just fill it with type 1. It is the one that I'm certain all the environmentalists and labor groups and a few other folks, some of them are right here in the audience, would love for us to do. It is not a cheap option. And if you can see the graph in your report, you can see the annual cost of filling that position, that open position with type 1. This is going to be the yellow, not actually, it's more of orangey line, which is the highest cost. And this is an annual cost. It starts sometime in 2017 at about $6 million, and it ends at about $14 million in 2021. And this is just to fill the open position, not the full 25% that we're looking for. The third option was suggested by one of you folks, and actually very tempting, and that's for every 1 credit or PCC2 that we cannot get in the marketplace, we replace it with 2 PCC3. PCC3 is another renewable type of energy, but it's not bundled. Basically, you go out to any state that is connected to the Western grid and buy a credit, which is exactly what we do for all the other types, by the way. We're only buying credits. You buy a credit, but you don't have any transmission path at all. You don't have any contractual transmission path that connects that resource all the way to California. Technically, quite frankly, that doesn't matter because any generation on the Western grid is connected to California, whether we like it or not, whether we choose to or not, because the electricity is going to flow in the path of least resistance. And so if you put in 1 megawatt hour of renewable resource in Idaho or Montana or Utah or Colorado, that 1 megawatt hour of resource will help you lower the amount of energy that you're using from natural gas by 1 megawatt hour, 1 for 1, which is not what I can say for 1 megawatt hour in California coming from solar nowadays. So option 3 basically say that we will meet all the requirements that the state put on us. They basically, for this year, for example, they say you have 27% renewable resources that you have to have in your mix. And that 27% could be minimum of 75% type 1, maximum of 10% type 3, and the other 15% could be either type 1 or type 2. What I'm suggesting is we meet all 27% with type 1. The most expensive stuff, we'll just do the whole thing with type 1. We're not going to take advantage of the 25% that they give us to do, type 3 and type 2. Then the rest of the amount that we cannot get from type 2 will just go and get type 3 renewable. And that option is, if you look at your graph, is quite reasonable, and it's fairly close to the baseline. The baseline being if we manage to find type 2 resource, just like we said we will try to do initially. And by the way, our obligations to renewable resources go up year by year. So it goes from 27% this year to 29% next year, 31% the year after, 33%, then it goes between 33% to 50% by the year 2030. So basically, the approach that I'm suggesting here will get you to increase the type 1 that you use in the mix every year and reduces the type 3 or the type 2, whatever that is that you can't find in the market, year after year, until by 2030, it's all type 1 and it's all large hydro. These are the 4 options that we are recommending. And the option 1 and option number 2 are probably the toughest one to sell. So after discussing this with the executive committee, we seem to be between option 3 and 4, or a combination of the 2, actually. It was suggested that why don't you do the option number 4, but for every PCC2 that you cannot find get twice as many PCC3, so we're going to basically negative greenhouse gas, not just zero, but negative greenhouse gas. All options are before you. One thing, you are guaranteed that whichever option you choose, or if you choose an entirely different option that doesn't exist on this piece of paper, we will do everything conceivably possible to go out there and make it happen, and make it happen at the least cost, and hopefully without impacting the operation of the grid. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop and open it up for questions.
Okay, so I kind of want to start with questions. I was sort of thinking those that weren't on the executive committee might want to ask questions first, since we've had, unless Howard's dying to make a comment.
There are two questions that might be.
Okay, go ahead.
First question, Tom. On the type 2, it's not just the price, it's the total availability. At any price, we probably couldn't fulfill all of our type 2 requirement.
We could, because what people will do is they will give you type 2 that really is a type 1,
Type
but
1.
since you're willing to pay the type 1 price, they'll call it type 2. They'll call it whatever you want,
Okay.
as long as they get the high price.
Okay, but there's no real type 2 that, okay, so that's that one question. The second question was, what are our local competitors doing in terms of their mix on renewable? Do we know any of that?
Most of them are, if you take many of them don't, they try to get away from type 3 because apparently it's just not very politically palatable to a lot of people. But on the other hand, they have a lot of conventional energy. So, for example, Peninsula is 75%, 50% renewable, 25% greenhouse gas free, but the other 25% is just your dirty stuff or gray stuff or just system power. So if you take that and you add it up to whatever type 2 that they have managed to buy, that definitely would be larger than what we suggest to buy as type 3.
Okay, any more questions?
I have one.
Okay, let's go with Jim Griffith, Director Griffith.
Yes, thank you. So obviously, because this is a complicated topic, I've spent some time discussing it with our staff and some of the local experts on this. And they're actually somewhat in accord in recommending option 4 with a 12.5% split. I'm curious your reaction to that.
We have filled some of the position, the 25% of type 2, we already filled some of that. So what we have for 2017, we have somewhere around 18% of the total load that's have yet to be acquired or at least hedged. So I would assume that you're suggesting splitting 9 and 9, something like that. It will be a little more expensive. It's not going to be as expensive as option number 2. If that's what you desire, more than happy to figure out how to do it and do it well.
When you say a little more expensive, is it pushing up against our ability to compete with PG&E?
None of the options that I presented to you today is for 2017, and to the extent 2018 looks pretty much what we expect it to look like, is going to put us at a competitive disadvantage.
Okay.
It's just, there's the gap. The question is, you have an extra money, what do you want to do with that money? You can type 1 it, or you can buy some programs and systems for the customers that will give them what they want and what you can provide them with.
Okay, thank you.
Director Corrigan.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So do we have the ability to change the ratios? Like right now, we're looking at for 17 and 18. Could we change the ratios going out so that the forecasting doesn't look so skewed in the longer view after 19 and 2021? Could we change it and say, well, this was what we promised and we're getting our feet under us, but part of our master plan is to reevaluate the ratio, and in 2020, we expect to be X instead of this 25, 25, 50.
I think that's an excellent question, an excellent point to make, and it's a good segue for what I was going to talk about next. And that is, I think you're right on, because we can't sustain this 25, 25, 50 anymore, because apparently type 2 is no longer that, it's not available in the market, and certainly not in abundance as it used to be. I would assume that marketers and suppliers have found a way to turn the type 2 into a type 1, and instead of realizing a $5 or $6 premium, now they pretty much push for $15 and $16 premium. I think that's what's taking place in the marketplace. It's an educated guess on my part, but I cannot for certain know what's on their mind and how they are operating their business. So yes, we definitely need to go back and look at that resource mix. Yes, we need to look at the product offering that we have already in place and address it and see if that's the proper offering and make a change to it.
Director Sinks, I think you were next.
So what is the state going to do with the current RPS, given that we are now, I mean, there was a day this year, right, where we generated more solar, and solar was worth negative sometime in March, I believe, 17th or something. What is, I mean, when we, maybe to put this in context, when we went forward and we decided what we wanted to do, we put a premium on getting to 100% carbon-free electricity. And that was the prime goal. And according to the staff report here, we were paying $18 million annually for that decision we made. And that was the prime directive. So now we're talking about the RPS, which is a pretty political thing. But, I mean, what I've heard from experts is, well, due to regulations in California and the birds, we can't really put up more wind power feasibly. Solar, we got the duck curve problem. So are we chasing some, I mean, what's the state going to do to provide always-on power? I mean, that's really the problem we're looking at here, right? I mean, we have to make rational decisions, and the RPS, frankly, is pretty problematic.
I think, I mean, when you ask what is the state is planning to do, the state is not just a single player. The state is, you got the legislators, and
Sure.
they have their ideas. They are supported or not by interest groups, environmental groups, labor groups. They have their idea about what they like the state to do. There's, of course, the operator, the California Independent System Operator. They have an entirely different idea. They are shooting for more regional approach, whereby it's not just a California Independent System Operator, but it's the region system operator that will eventually kind of wipe the differences between these two different types that were at one point or another got created. Then there's, of course, us, and what positions and what decisions we decide to take in order to serve our own constituents. There will be, next month, a strategic plan coming your way, and I pretty much put all the, what I'd like to see happen for the power supply resource in that strategic plan, and you can look at it and you can decide here for yourselves, does this make sense, or should we change it to make it more palatable for other groups out there?
But I mean, so with regard to always-on power, that also meets the state RPS. What do we got at this point?
I'm sorry, say that again?
In terms of power that's always on, when the sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow, what do we got?
Generally, on a daily basis, you will have must-run hydro, and we're going to be getting a lot of it. We got a lot of it in March, and
That's
why we
not
had
part of the
pricing.
RPS.
No, it's not part of the RPS.
So here's what I'm asking. We said we wanted to be carbon-free. That's the first thing. What is both carbon-free and part of the RPS?
Solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, landfill gas, and a few other, wave power. Really the largest three that are that are considered to be renewable and looked at seriously is solar, wind, as well as geothermal. Solar nowadays is almost as much we have in California as we do wind, probably even surpass the wind. We have almost 9,000 megawatts of solar, and just, yeah, for comparison's sake, the peak load in the state of California is roughly about 50,000 megawatt in the summertime. So you get 20% of that peak load, yeah, comes in during certain hours from solar. And in the springtime is the lowest peak, and that's why you have the negative pricing, because there's so much solar, and the combination of the solar and the hydro, all of them running at zero cost. Yeah, hydro runs at zero cost. In order to run solar, and you always run it because you can't stop it if the sun is shining, the ISO has to pay somebody, has to actually pay somebody to have them ramp down their generation, and that what creates the negative pricing. Because that money that the ISO paid to that generator to ramp down their generation has to be paid by somebody else, and that somebody else is going to be the solar providers and some of the hydro. At least during the month of March, most likely April, maybe some of May.
Okay, I guess the point I'm trying to make with my questions is, you know, it seems to me that the state is going to have to come to grips with this in how it defines this.
And
But
so
I- but I
I
really
hope
think
that they
we
do
may-
that before we suffer what Germany suffered back in 2012, because they have gone overboard on installing solar, and that eventually caused a brownout.
And I think in terms of greenhouse gas reduction, climate change mitigation, we've done the responsible thing in saying our prime directive is carbon-free. And I'm frankly less interested in what the composition of the non-hydro stuff is. It's just because, yeah, I think the state has made choices that were probably good 10 years ago, but they sure need adjustment now. And we can't have Germany, and we don't want to have negative pricing on solar. We don't want to create a train wreck, encouraging all of our residents to put everything on their roofs and let's go solar. I mean, I was at a Peninsula Democratic Club meeting recently. I put in a card that said, what are you proposing to do about the duck curve? No discussion. The discussion is all, let's incent more and more building of solar. But honestly, right, we're all going to be in a world of hurt here pretty soon because we're overbuilding it, and our peak on the grid is now in the evening. So what are we going to do about that? I'd rather have a real discussion about that than fritter too many resources over exactly what type the renewables are, and maybe advocate for a more responsible position at the state level on what ought to be in the bucket. Thanks.
It's a good point. Let's go on to Director Abe Koga.
Thank you. And please excuse me if some of my questions are basic. I missed all of last year, so I'm trying to get up to speed. But going back to the options and then the chart you have on the pricing, what is the baseline curve or the pricing or amount value consist of? Is that what we already have locked in for hydro type 1? And then what you expected or what you had estimated type 2 would cost, or
the baseline is if we manage to fill the open position with type 2, just like we thought we will be able to going in. So that's the baseline.
But you mentioned that the prices fluctuated, gone up. So what point in time was that?
This includes now the more revised number of what the type 2 costs.
Okay.
Which is really around 150% of what we, and here I'm talking about just a premium over the index price. It's roughly now about 150% of what I thought it should be, what I thought it would be going in. So that base price reflects that increase in type 2.
And the type 2 you're saying now is more expensive, and it's the same at price as type 1, or is it still
It has
lower
not.
cost?
No, as you can see from the difference, if you look at the graph, the Type 2, as it's priced today, it's at the red line. The Type 1 is at the orange line.
So the issue then is that the availability of type 2, there's not enough?
It-
Or can we
Combination
get
of
it
the
if we
availability
paid
and the
more?
price. And it's probably both are linked because it's not available, marketers and suppliers push the price up.
Right. But I guess my question is, if we were to pay the premium, is there enough supply? And would that still be cheaper than buying all type 1?
I wish I can tell you yes, but at this moment, I can't guarantee that either, because so far, every time we went out, the ones that many of them said, we're not touching this. The ones that said, yeah, we'll supply type 2, gave us limited quantity. And we've been taking as many of those at a reasonable price as we possibly can.
And that's
the
the
one
7%.
single supplier that says, yes, I will give you the entire quantity that you want, 6 weeks later now is saying, I can't, and by the way, the price has gone up. So I'm sure if we go out again and say, price is not an issue, I probably will get all the quantity I need.
But you don't know if it'll be more than or equal to type 1?
Exactly.
Or
I don't know if it's
less
going to be more
that.
than this.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
But you're saying you'll try, but you want, this would be, what we're deciding tonight or potentially deciding is the Plan B. Is that, okay.
Precisely, yes.
So then, in terms of option 4, the breakdown, and this goes to Director Griffith's comments or questions, but is the option 4 breakdown currently showing, is that 2% more type 1 and then the rest of, so 16% type 3?
Roughly, yes.
Okay. So then my question would be similar to Director Griffith, and talking to my staff and my community members who are here, I would like to see what, either if it's 9%, or looking at the RPS content requirements, we have to get to 10% or less, right, for the type 3 by 2020. So can we go lower than 10% would be my request, and how much would that cost in this chart? And I mean, you can get back to us, I guess, unless we have to decide. That would be my last question. Do we have to decide this tonight, or can we get the financial?
I think it would be helpful because we are in 2017. We do have an open position in 2017, and the further that we go into the year, the more expensive anything that we're going to buy will become, especially if it's either renewable or greenhouse gas free. Everybody that had something to sell sold it back in March of 2016 because all utilities that operate in norm operation, they've been operating for years, they have to line up their resources 100% of the following year, 9 months ahead of time. So everybody locked in 2017 already back in March and April of 2016. We are doing what we do now because we just started operation and we just have an open position. It's not gonna, the more we go in, the more difficult it will be and the more expensive it will be to fill it in. So give me a plan B and let me go out there and do my best to get one type 2, and if I can't get it, then I have plan B to lean on.
I guess the question or the challenge is that without knowing how much these other percentage mixes cost, I don't know if I could decide tonight.
I mean, I can just
Because
look at the two
I can
graphs
tell
right here
you-
and tell you what they would.
Okay.
Because
What
really,
would you say, a 9%?
For example, if you do a 9%, then you can just easily take that cost associated with the orange graph and the cost associated with the blue one. And
The blue one, okay. Wait, no, the blue one is the mix of 2 and 16.
and
So,
go somewhere in between, a little closer probably with the one small variation towards the orange graph, and that tells you what that alternative that you're suggesting is going to look like.
okay. Okay, I'll figure that out if you want to move on to other questions.
So Director Cortese, go ahead.
I just have one question. You answered a question for Director Griffin on whether or not option 4 at 9.9 would push us out of competitiveness. Will My question is, will it, and it's similar to the question I think that was just being asked, what does it do, the $1.6 million over the next 5 years? If you go 9-9, and is that a problem for you? Would you? I'm going to ask a compound question here. The second question would be, would you prefer more flexibility than that as a board action, and if so, why? Than us dictating a 9-9, for example.
If you wish to do the 9-9, or if you want to, for example, offer an option that will say, fine, I'll let you go and buy some type 3, just make sure it's under 10%. I want a single-digit type 3, and the rest you're going to have to either get it from type 2, go scout the market a little bit more, or get it from type 1, up to you. Then give me that, but give it to me only for 2017 and 2018 and not beyond. Then let us take a little time and come up with a more appropriate strategy that we can discuss back with the various groups and eventually bring it to the board for action, along with a different marketing approach, in order to get us away from this 50-50 routine that seems to be put us in a bind.
Thank you.
Okay, Director Gibbons?
Thank you. So I'm going to try and summarize where I think where my questions are in their part 1 and part 2. So tonight, ideally, you need the backup plan. You know what our primary goal is. You're still working on it, but you need a backup plan. And the backup plan approval tonight is important because the year is escalating as we speak.
Yes.
So I'm fine with that. The second is what you just were talking about. Is there a way to have this discussion related to 2017 and 18, and then refer to the risk management strategic plan coming up, which would then help us determine the future? So although you've done the diagram here to give us, I think appropriately, the layout until 2021, it would be a more realistic diagram after we've evaluated the risk plan.
That is my intent,
Okay.
Director Gibbons. I would not do any action, depends on your decision tonight, that will take us anywhere beyond 2018.
Okay.
We'll need a little more time to think about it, and by next spring, we should be able to have something a little bit more solid that will take us beyond 2018.
Okay, so that's very helpful. So does the fact that we have a reserve, it's 15% our reserve power that we have to purchase? What's the?
This is I think you're referring to resource adequacy.
Yes.
This is the capacity that the amount of capacity that we need to buy on a monthly basis to make sure that there are resources out there that we can call on anytime in case the ISO needs to bring resources into the mix.
So if I'm still understanding that correctly, is there, if we don't use that and it satisfies our needs and it's, I'm going to call it excess, can we use that later to help us balance down?
The resource adequacy is an entirely different
Is it? Okay.
product. One is the capacity and one is energy. The resource adequacy relates to the capacity or the amount of power that we need to have in place, how large the engine should be. The energy is really how much gasoline you're going to burn in order to run a certain distance. There's two different products and they don't.
There's no way we can take advantage
No.
of one for the other. Okay, I tried. And then the final thing as we go forward on the strategy, and maybe this is more of a comment than a question, but it was a question in my mind. Technology, education, I mean, everyone's been, we actually talked about this in the study session we had that Saturday, that people have been educated to not use power in the peak of the day. And now we're saying that, gee, it may be a good thing, so we have to re-educate people. So my questions are, as we go forward with the strategy for 2019 and on, we look at the whole marketplace is going to change for PG&E as well as ourselves and anyone, and people can be re-educated, and people are becoming more electricity consumers and self-producing. We talked about that as impacting how much we have to buy. And storage technology is changing a lot, particularly with automobiles and different kinds of things. So I think there's a lot of things that we could take into account, if I'm correct, that would influence how we move forward. So I'm thinking that the decision tonight is really a backup position for 2 years, and that there's a lot more to be thought about in the future.
Yeah, and I think the most effective way, and you are correct, the educating the people about how to change the behavior is something that we're going to need to be doing over the next 18 months. But the most appropriate way to educate folks is to send them the appropriate price signal. So comes 2019, there will be entirely different rate structure that will be put in front of you that will take into account when the power is generated, how much it costs, what's causing a problem to the grid, and how we can avert that. And therefore, here's the price signal that the customer need to have in order to change their behavior, as you will.
And the same is going to be true, if I understood correctly, PG&E is facing the same thing.
Of course. And a matter of fact, PG&E is planning to go time of use as a default rate for everybody, comes 2019.
Okay, let me check back in with Director Cortese. I know you need to leave soon. Any other parting comments or?
No, for whatever it's worth, I apologize. I'm going to evidently have to leave before the vote, and I'm sure there'll be some discussion on whatever motion is on the floor, but I'm leaning to option 4. I find myself a little ambivalent to Director Griffith's suggestion, especially if there's a limitation out to 17, 18 at this point. That's just my sense of, I'm trusting the staff's recommendation on option 4 as giving them what they need for now. That's just my thought. I appreciate you allowing me to sort of speak on the motion before there's even a motion, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Director Corrigan, I'd like to do public testimony. Would you be willing to wait? So let me open public testimony now. I have one speaker card from David Surhausen. Hopefully I got the name close. I can't, Rod, how come I can't get the timer to work?
Hi, David Orhausen, representing the South Bay Labor Council. We represent 101 affiliated unions in Santa Clara and about 100,000 union members. Just want to say that if we go down the route of supplementing our renewable energy through renewable certificates, we're concerned that you are going to be buying dirty energy and then classifying it as renewable. If the intention is to buy clean energy, then we should make sure that we buy clean energy. With the purchase of dirty energy, there's a great chance that it will come from out of state with low-paying, poor-quality jobs. We should make sure that it comes from in-state and provides good quality jobs for the people in state. Thank you.
Any questions? No? Okay. That's the only card I have. Does anybody else wish to speak to us on this item? James Talia.
Hi, James Talia, resident of Sunnyvale. Just briefly, I think option 4 makes sense with some variations, mainly to keep in mind that the state, when they set what the RPS was, that there's a certain percentage and an implied hierarchy among the 3 bucket types. And so I think, as someone was mentioning, a 12.5% maximum for the bucket 3 makes sense in that in some of the structure that the state set up for the RPS mix, that of the total renewables, 25% max in the first compliance period of the RPS was just for bucket 3. So that would be 12.5% if we try to mirror what the state legislature put together. So there's a nice symmetry to that would align with a 12.5%. And it's not too far off from what is envisioned in option 4. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? None? Okay. With that, I'll close the public testimony and bring it back up to the directors for a motion or more questions. Let's go. Howard had it, Director Miller had his
Yeah, I was
finger
going
up
to just
first.
jump to a motion. I would move that we allow staff to produce or procure 9% type 3, the remainder to come from 1 and 2 for years 17 and 18, and bring us back a more comprehensive plan sometime later this year that talks about how we're going to deal with this issue.
Okay, we have a motion, a second. Motion by Director Miller, second by Director Corrigan.
Discussion.
Discussion, so let's start with Director Gibbons.
I'm going to ask the board and staff to bear with me. Can you describe and respond to the, I'm struggling with this, to support this, because of my understanding of what type 3 is. Could we have a discussion of what type 3 is again?
Type 3 is a renewable resource connected to the Western grid. And the Western grid, by the way, have the state of California, 13 other states, either fully or partial, northern, southern part of Canada, pretty much BC, British Columbia, and portion of Mexico. That is all interconnected in one grid. Type 3 is basically any renewable resource that's on that grid with no contractual transmission rights to bring that resource to California.
Right.
That's what type 3 is. Basically, you go to somebody that is promoting wind in Idaho, and you buy that energy. You buy only the credit that comes with that energy. The energy itself is sold into whatever system that's around that generating resource.
So if someone asks us, is it dirty energy?
It is not. It absolutely is not.
Okay.
And a matter of fact, it's arguably, and technical people will tell you that, to be correct, almost 100% of them will tell you that arguably type 3 resource is more greenhouse gas free than type 2.
Okay, thank you. And could I understand the motion again, please?
What I was trying to get at was the split the difference, which came out to 9%. I liked the idea of keeping us under the 10% where the state is ultimately going. So that was why I said allow staff to go up to 9% of type 3.
Type 3, and then the other?
And I wanted it limited to 17, 18, because I think we need to come up with a plan that's a little bit more well-reasoned than this. And that was the last part of my motion, which was sometime this year, staff will come back with a plan, which will be part of the strategic plan, so we can talk about how we want to solve this beyond 2018.
Right, and the other 9% would be type 1?
I left it up to staff. If they could procure some more type 2 at a cheaper price than 1, go do it.
Well, I think they're going to try, so.
Yeah, so my motion was really type 3 limited to 9%, go solve the rest of the problem with 1 and 2.
What if they can't? Because they're already,
No,
so forgive me.
they can solve it between 1 and 2. I leave it to their discretion.
That's what I was misunderstanding. Okay, thank you so much.
So let me go to Director Griffith next.
Thanks. I'm almost okay with the motion. I was going to suggest a friendly amendment in that the 18% gap right now is variable. I mean, a year from now, that 18% might be 16 or 20 based on what it is. How about if we just have a straight policy based on what James Talea said, 12.5, 12.5. Regardless of what it is, 12.5, 12.5.
I like the 9 because it was a little bit more restrictive. It kept us in the single digits. There's no logic or engineering behind any of this. It's all in the political space, so it was kind of a gut. And allowing it to be, a third higher, which would be your proposal.
It's just, it seems like it's easier to implement if it's just 12.5, 12.5.
Whichever one you folks decide on, it will be implemented. I think the reason that 12.5 probably, we can work 12.5, but right now we're not. We already met some of the type 2. We already bought some type 2, so our short position is not 25%. Our short position on type 2 for both years is less than 25% of the total. And I would dare to say it's probably 18% for 2017, maybe roughly about 20% for 2018.
I guess what I was suggesting is 12.5% is always, you just that's what you're getting that as recs. That's just what it is. So it's only sort of the remaining 5.5%, 4%, 6%, whatever it is.
Yeah,
that you have to worry about.
but I was the same thing, but I was sitting at a lower level, which has the net effect, right? We're not going to be any more or less carbon neutral. We're not going to be any more or less, renewable in the political sense. What we're doing is spending a little bit more money by being 9%, a little bit more money, predominantly in the state of California, if it's type 1 that we're buying, which is noted by the Labor Council as good for jobs and local stuff. I could see the argument for 12. We as an organization would make a few million more, which I think we're going to need in the out years. But I don't.
Okay. Doesn't sound like I'm going to win, so I'll back off.
I think it's still a viable spot. It's the same principle you had, Jim, which is just a solid number in the ground, and that gives staff some flexibility to solve the problem.
Director Sinks?
Yeah, I wanted to find out, so what's the cost involved if we say take the motion as proposed? What incremental cost are we paying?
Over which line of those?
Well, for the next 2 years, right? We've said we're going to cover 17 and 18. What's the incremental cost over option 4?
It will take me a second to work this
No, please.
out of my head.
That's okay.
Let me look at the graph for a second. For 17 and 18, over the recommended option number 4, we'll be looking at roughly I would venture a guess of about maybe $6 million.
Looks like your finance director's shaking his head. He's
Am I
thinks
close?
reasonable guess.
Thank you.
So $6 million for the remainder of 2017 and all of 2018.
Yes, relative to option number 4.
So I take the red line and I, between the 2 years, throw about $6 million in there.
Roughly. Yes. Done? Okay.
Okay, so in the...
I like Jim's proposal.
The Jim proposal, by us eyeballing it, is only $5 million, so it costs us $1 million to be a little bit more. It doesn't, honestly, I made the motion just to put a stake in the ground. It doesn't really matter if everybody wants to be $5 million instead of $6 million. We could easily switch.
I mean, one way to state it would be up to 1/8 of our supply, right? Could be type 3 would be another way to put it.
Yeah, we should just do the motion. It's just so arbitrary. Out of a $250 million budget, right, we're looking at $1 million. And I know we all want to count every penny, but I promise you, and nobody in the room wants to hear this, the energy market is far more variable than the precision with which we are attempting to orchestrate this $1 million. We are going to see variations month to month as we go through this process that will make your head scratch compared to this $1 million. But it'll all come out. In the,
$6 million.
no, the difference between the $6 million and the $5 million proposal.
There's another just variation that you may want to keep in mind. That we keep talking about 2017 and 2018 as if our forecast is a given. Now, remember, our forecast assumes 8% opt-out on the residential side and 4% on the commercial side. So far, we have seen less than 1% and even less than 0.5% in terms of actual demand. So we're going to be scrambling comes July again.
Yeah.
With another open position that we're going to have to fill of all sides and types. So give me a backup position that is clear. 12.5% sounds great. 9.9% to keep it in a single digit sounds just fine. Whatever you folks agree to is something that I will take and make work.
Okay, so we do have a motion, and I know some people may be thinking, should I vote for this motion, or should I wait for one that's a slightly different number? And, you know, I haven't heard from everybody, so I personally can't count noses. I do kind of like Jim's proposal a little bit better, but I'm hearing at least 2 people saying they don't, and I heard probably 3 or 4 yes, so I don't know what's, you know, I'm thinking myself what's most likely. So does anybody else want to make any comments before okay, I'll go ahead and call the motion. So please go ahead, Director Corrigan.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to be very clear that I really was supporting the notion of splitting as dictated in that option, but that at 12%, 12.5%, like I'm fine with that. So I don't care if you want to alter it as a friendly amendment or vote this one up or down.
Let me just ask a question. For those of us who kind of started at 9, is there anybody that would object if we made it 12.5?
No.
Then I accept Jim's friendly amendment to go to 12.5.
Hallelujah.
And the seconder was?
Courtney.
Corrigan. So you okay.
I accept it as well.
So we've now changed the motion to 12.5.
Now can we call the question?
Would anybody like to comment? No. Okay. Jim would like to.
I was just going to say,
George
I
Griffin.
was just prepared to say, you know, at $1 million, 9 is fine. But
So, all right, the motion is currently 12.5% for 17 and 18.
Going once.
Okay, so all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any abstentions? Sounds like it passes unanimously with 10 of us here.
Thank you.
Any other comments on this? Shall I close this item? We're not quite at my hour and a half, so. All right, so I'll close item number 4, and that's it on our agenda except for board member announcements and direction on future agenda items. So I believe next time we're planning a closed session for review of the CEO, is that right?
Yes, and I was actually going to ask Greg if it's possible to schedule a meeting at 6, then have the closed session between 6 and 7. This way, the meeting would run as normal as possible.
Do any directors have an issue with starting the May meeting at 6 o'clock? What's
Should be May 10th, I believe.
So May 10th at 6 p.m. May 10th at 6 p.m. is what you're suggesting.
Right, so what we can do tonight is adjourn this meeting to the closed session at 6 p.m., and then the regular meeting will start at 7 p.m.
Okay. All right. That sounds like that's going to work. Are there any other director announcements? Director Miller?
Yeah, so April 22nd is Earth Day, and at 11 o'clock at the Saratoga Library, there'll be a brief presentation on Silicon Valley clean energy given by myself. So if anybody's from Saratoga or wants to come visit Saratoga on Earth Day, you can hear me talk about this. 11 o'clock at the Saratoga Library.
Okay. Director Sinks.
Or you could come here from 11:30 to 3, or go to his first, and then come to our Earth Day. We always have a spectacular, it's fabulous. You wouldn't want to be in any other city.
All right. Any other comments? All right, then okay, Director Gibbons.
Thank you. I would just like to say that I had several community meetings this week where Silicon Valley Clean Energy came up, and I had some negative feedback about people not understanding what was going on, and I talked with staff, and Pamela was extremely right on top of exactly what the community asked for. They wanted to know, did they get noticed? They had gotten noticed from the city, on the city webpage. It was on Nextdoor. They got their own neighborhood association notices, and they went on from there. So I was in the newspaper and ads. So when I explained all of that, they were very apologetic for feeling like they weren't being communicated with, in addition to the postcards, of course. So it's tough in this social media market and people's attention spans, but we covered a lot of bases, and I wanted to compliment staff that was nicely done. I did have some feedback that I thought was useful, and others may have it. And we have a table that compares PG&E with our two programs, and they felt the table was too arbitrary. They wanted to actually see the bill. They wanted to see a PG&E bill and our bill. And when I talked to Pamela about it, it made sense because some of the line items don't line up, and they wanted to do a line-for-line, bottom-line comparison. So I thought that was good feedback for staff to consider. And I did look at the San Francisco one, and they did have a bill-to-bill comparison. So just feedback for anyone else who might run across some of those kind of questions.
Director Griffith?
Yeah, I just had a suggestion based on some input I've received from the community. We spent a lot of time tonight talking about the mix that we use. I've had community members specifically ask, what kind of power are we using? And when I look at the website, I'm sure it's in the documents if you look at the minutes, but it's not in the FAQ. And I realize this is a fluid thing anyway, and it's difficult to say, here's the exact mix. But if we could put something up there that tells people, generally speaking, here's the kind of power we're providing. We've just said, you know, we're using hydro, we're using solar, but nothing about percentages, nothing about, you know, the general mix. And if we can do something a little more specific on the website that's generally accurate, I think there are some people that would appreciate having easy access to that information.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, anybody else?
I just wanted,
Director Sinks?
yeah, I agree with Director Griffith's comment, but I would like to thank our marketing department. I noticed these in our packet. These are going into print ads. The wind, water, solar, I think they're clever, they're simple and clean, and I appreciate that. I mean, we need the complex stuff, right? And we also need the simple, clean branding to get our name out, so.
All the credit goes to Alan.
This is a win-win situation, good day, sunshine, from water to watts. Clever, catchy, right? It makes you want to see what's going on.
Okay, can I call this adjourned now? All right, we're adjourned till May 10th, 6 o'clock, closed session. Thank you.
Did you get this done in less than an hour and a half?
Yes.